There we go. All right, then I think I'm ready to go. Thanks again, and it's quite an honor to be here today and to be invited to present my work. Quite honored to do that. Well, what can I say after that very nice introduction by Tuomas? Yes, indeed, I'm a research project leader in Breda, so a medium-sized University of Applied Sciences in the south of the Netherlands. And I've spent the last, well, 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years, almost solely on this thing that's called the MSP Challenge Simulation Platform. And basically, I lead a team of people who develop it, design and develop it, and I'm involved in applying it actually. And you'll learn lots about that during my keynote this morning. So I've entitled my my keynote MSP Challenge Simulation Platform, a platform for simulation games about maritime spatial planning and struggles around the design, use, and impact. Of course, that latter part I should emphasize. I will talk about how, we've designed, used, and tried to get some impact with this particular simulation games platform. But I'll stress the struggles because, like any game projects, gamification projects, there's of course a struggle to figure out what exactly to do in terms of design, in terms of application or use, and the impact that you would like to see. And it's rather than try to convince you that we've done everything perfectly and that we're brilliant, I'd rather also stress the struggles we've been having along the way. So that'll be sort of the essence of my talk. It'll be quite practical actually. So I hope I won't disappoint those that are more theoretical or fundamental scientifically inclined. Bear with me, I do promise to tell a nice story. I have structured my story along these questions. I will first explain what the heck this maritime or marine spatial planning, MSP for short, actually is, also in terms of sustainability, of course, the main topic of our symposium today. Then I'll talk about MSP Challenge itself. What is it? That'll be sort of roughly the halfway point, maybe a bit before already the halfway point, to allow quite a lot of time to explain what kind of use and impact we would like to see from MSP Challenge and how we've been working towards that so far, to wrap up, of course, with what's next. All right, so that's the plan for today. Hope you enjoy the story. Let's start talking about what MSP is. The terms are used interchangeably. I have a nice video. You already saw a sneak peek just before. I have a nice video that really explains in just 1.5 minutes the essence of MSP. Of course, I'll have more to tell after that, but and actually it's a longer video, but I'm only taking the first 1.5 minutes of it. Have a look, and I'll get back to you after it.
Life on Earth depends on the ocean. It covers 71% of our planet, and naturally, people care deeply about it. With its abundant life and vast resources, the ocean means something different to every one of us. We all have our own interests. Generations of fishermen have gained a livelihood from the ocean. Conservationists are committed to protecting it, while a container ship captain needs deep water and direct access to the port via the shortest route. Time is money. So where do our priorities lie when a marine area is home to wildlife, fishing, and shipping at the same time? And what if the situation is complicated by minerals the mining industry wants to extract? Or if an investor plans to build a wind farm? The responsible planner, typically a government official, faces many challenges in dealing with all these demands. Exactly how do you satisfy all these people and their interests? How do you balance using and protecting the same ocean space? Marine Spatial Planning, MSP for short, is a relatively new way of managing human activities that take place in the ocean. It's a long-term and strategic process that guides where, when, and how human uses take place. This can be useful where there are opportunities for new uses or where activities impact on nature. MSP can help to balance competing interests, making sure society benefits while protecting the marine environment.
Yep. So there you have it. The essence of MSP, beautifully depicted in this movie. I wish I could take credit for making this movie. I can't. It was made by a bunch of people being coordinated by the University of Liverpool, Professor Stephen Jay. They made this video, and again, it's a longer video, offering much more detail after this point. If you just Google for MSP in a nutshell, you can view the whole thing. But yeah, it's an amazing video to introduce people to MSP. What's also amazing is just to end on this picture. The woman, MSP, the Maritime Spatial Planner, actually holding in the scale the balancing the use and protection of the sea. I really love it because it's a beautiful metaphor or analogy for sustainability, right? The kind of sustainability that's behind this, the more environmental and economic or social sustainability that's being held in the balance. Of course, that's also then where certain people, especially from the environmental sustainability side or hard sustainability, if you want to call it, then immediately critique MSP on. It's balancing the use and protection. Why isn't protection the foundation and the use is only building on the foundation? Why is it in a balance? That sort of depicts some of the debates that many have had in the MSP community. Also something to add to this video is, yeah, it's not just about Maritime Spatial Planner doesn't only have to deal with all these different stakeholders and balancing their interests in one maritime spatial plan. They also have to dig into the specifics of each sector alone on its own. So each sector also has its own developments, of course, and its own complexity. To give you some examples of that, I'm sure you're familiar with what's happening at least in the North Sea, but actually all over the world when it comes to offshore wind farm development. That's now a huge booming industry in the North Sea region, at least. And yeah, it's a region with developments on its own that a Maritime Spatial Planner has to dig into. For instance, floating wind farms are being developed, researched and developed at the moment. So wind farms that aren't turbines that aren't drilled into the sea floor anymore, but they're actually floating in the water and they're just tethered or anchored to the sea floor, which then allows turbines to be wind farms to be developed in actually deeper waters than conventional wind farms. So that's something a Maritime Spatial Planner also needs to dig into. And of course, fishing is an industry with a lot of dynamics lately, especially in the North Sea region, if only because of Brexit, but also because of hot issues that came up over the years. For instance, electric pulse fishing, something that Dutch fishing fleets took a little bit too far. And was then subsequently banned in basically by the European Union after some vehement opposition by the French government. So that these are things, again, that the Maritime Spatial Planner also needs to get into. Meanwhile, of course, we're facing yeah, quite a disastrous situation in the marine ecosystem to begin with in many waters all over the world. We've got dead zones in big parts of seas all across the world. Dead zones being areas of sea where there's limited to no oxygen or eutrophication, so too many nutrients, too many substances in the water that either on their own or together make it impossible for life to continue. Dead zones. And plastic waste, for instance, that needs to go and is being removed by lots of different foundations all over the world now, including the ocean cleanup, for instance. Just another example of how marine protection is a world on its own and has its own complexity that the Marine Spatial Planner also needs to deal with. So I guess I'm painting a picture here of what MSP is. It might be nice to end this part by just showing some examples of what the end result looks like, the actual maritime spatial plan coming out of a planning process. Here are some examples of old maritime spatial plans of the Netherlands on the left and Belgium on the right. So on the left, you're seeing the Netherlands and its exclusive economic zone, as it's called, as well as territorial waters in the North Sea. And on the right, you're seeing the same, but for Belgium, and being a much smaller country and having a shorter coastline, its area is much smaller. Yeah, these are examples of the maps that are generated as end results, also as intermediate results, of course, to get feedback from stakeholders within governments and sector stakeholders on energy, shipping, fishing, etc. So typically you see a lots of room for shipping activity for just ships, shipping routes. You're seeing lots of room for protected areas for the marine ecosystem. And yeah, all the black dots on the left that you're seeing in the Dutch EEZ, in case you didn't know, those are all oil and gas installations. Many people don't really know that, but the North Sea is littered with them. Lots of oil and gas extraction taking place in the North Sea, both by the Netherlands, by the UK, by Norway, of course, and also a little bit by Denmark and Germany, actually all over the place. So yeah, that just goes to show in examples of the end result of the maritime spatial planning process, typically taking at least 1.5 years as a process. So you can imagine a whole team of national government policymakers, employees taking at least 1.5 years to go through a process of maritime spatial planning, from the very first meetings with stakeholders, making drafts, all the way until publishing a formal, final, well, final for now, maritime spatial plan. But meanwhile, they also have to talk to each other. The different maritime spatial planners of different countries really need to talk to each other, because yeah, they do also have to work on any mismatches between the plans of different countries or tensions between them. And here's an example of how well or not so well the British, Dutch, and German maritime spatial plans would link up if you just put the maps one-on-one together. Of course, this also shows things like different use of color schemes and legends and what have you. So sometimes a mismatch is actually not so much a mismatch, it's just a choice to represent the plan differently. But still, the maritime spatial planners are expected to come together and figure out whether all their plans together make sense for the marine ecosystem, right? You have to keep in mind that, marine species, fish, mammals, don't care for the borders that we create in the water, right? So we do have to make sure that there's at least some kind of coherence between the plans. So there you have it. This is a quick run through of what MSP is. I think you have a nice picture now of the process being a very lengthy, complex, and just tough process. Let's talk about what this MSP Challenge Simulation Platform is and what it's meant to do and why the heck did we start developing it with such a difficult and complex phenomenon of MSP in mind now. Well, MSP Challenge Simulation Platform is software. It's free and open source software. It's actually a client-server software suite, if you will. It has its foundation in game technology and game design, but it's not purely about that, I would say, because we integrate best available data on geographic data, ecological data, maritime data, real data of the real world in it. We connect that data and the software we create to 3 different simulators, one on the ecosystem that uses Ecopath with EcoSim, which is a separate bit of software. I'll get into that later. And the other 2 simulators being on shipping and energy. And the software also offers some scenario options, so you can set some goals if you like or not. You can control the time as a facilitator or an end user with a facilitator privilege. So basically you can say, I want to speed up the simulations, slow them down, or keep them paused, depending on how things are going and what you want to achieve. You can add some role play enhancements as well. Of course, you don't necessarily need the software to do that, but software just also aids in that. And altogether, that offers a rather flexible and multiplayer MSP experience, or MSP in a nutshell kind of experience. Because yeah, why create a perfect simulation of MSP when MSP takes more than 1.5 years, right? We don't want people to need to play a game for 1.5 years to get a full MSP experience. So we condense it, we get to the essence, so that people can play with it together as a group, online or offline, yeah, for about a day, maybe half a day, but ideally a day or 2 actually, to get a full sense of the MSP. It's ready to host any sea basin in the world. So actually, you just saw the logos change. I'll do that again. We actually host different sea regions like the Baltic Sea, like the North Sea and the Adriatic Sea, all with the same platform. And we could add more. It's not an automatic, just like that kind of process, but it is ready to host any sea basin in the world. And it's we're very lucky to have been supported by many EU authorities and stakeholders. But enough of this, it's time I showed you what it actually is, just by showing some demo videos. So I've got some demo videos ready that'll explain what it means as a single end user to log on with the game software to a server. That could include a dozen other players as well, all logging onto the same server. And I'll explain what that end user then sees and can do. So here you have it, the North Sea. When the end user first opens it, they get a map of the North Sea with lots of data layers. So they can analyze dozens of data layers. That's, of course, a very important starting position. People need to be able to figure out what's going on already in the North Sea in terms of marine protection, in terms of oil and gas installations and pipelines, in terms of shipping routes, energy, other energy stuff, so wind farms. And they need to be able to figure out, what does it all mean, all these areas? What are they called? What do they do? What don't they do? What's going on there? So that's the start of it, figuring out with all the data layers, the current status of a sea basin. So that's the first feature that people are confronted with and get to work with. Then, of course, what they can do is actually create new plans. So they can change or drop new marine plans, new ways of using the space. So for instance, let's say we want to develop a new wind farm. What you then do is you add the layers that you want to change with this plan. So in this case, we're working with wind farms, energy cables, and landing stations. And you select the date in the future upon which you want this plan to be implemented. So let's say 2030. So that's in this instance like 22 years, simulated years into the future. And by then you want this wind farm. Okay, let's start drawing then the wind farm. Let's find a spot in the northwestern corner of the Dutch exclusive economic zone. And let's start creating a shape that altogether forms this wind farm. So let's create something huge like this, just for testing purposes. This is an incredibly large wind farm area. It would never happen in real life, but we're just testing things out, right? We're just demoing. The energy simulation is already telling us that this could generate 35.71 gigawatts of energy. So we'll need lots of landing stations along the Dutch coast to get all that energy through cables to our electricity grid. So let's just do that then, and then start drawing some of those cables. We'll also need a lot of cables to get that energy. And as the player is doing this, this already becomes self-evident. So they're learning really by trying things out, of course, as a game designer likes to see happening. So okay, we've got some cables. Might be it's definitely not enough. Let's see. That does generate some issues. Oh, apparently we've done something here that doesn't work. Oh, there's a shipping lane in the way. Oh, I didn't know that. Didn't realize that. Okay, what else? There's something else. Ah, okay. There's also an oil and gas installation already there that I didn't see before. Right. Okay. Well, I've got some work to do. Right. Again, trial and error. Right. So here we see the essence. Well, at least one essence of maritime spatial planning already taking shape. Okay. So we're drawing up new spatial plans. We're figuring out how to fit everything in. Then another main feature is after you've finished everything, you've made a spatial plan, you can actually have it implemented and you can run the simulations and then see what happened. So what you're seeing right now is some options with which you can actually simulate and evaluate what your plan has done in terms of energy, shipping, and the marine ecosystem, so that you can try again once more in a different way, create more plans for a later future, or just restart and change your plan to see if you can get a better result. So in this case, what the user is doing is just looking back and forth in time to see how different groups of species, in this case, demersal fish, how they have flourished in this case, in this new wind farm. Actually, their density has gone up. And of course, that is might be an intriguing result. Like, how can that be? You've created something there, a wind farm, lots of human activity going on there to create that wind farm, lots of drilling of a turbine into the sea floor. But actually, after implementation, we see the fish, certain fish species flourish in that area. They aren't negatively affected, but actually positively affected if we were to interpret this increase in density as a positive outcome. Okay, that would be the start of further analysis. What's going on there? And at this point, it's nice to explain a little bit how that marine ecosystem simulation works to help explain the answer to that question I just raised of that increasing density of fish, group of fish, species group. I mentioned it before, we're working with a bit of software called Ecopath with EcoSim. This is a separate bit of software, also free and open source software, but it's been developed for much longer. It's been under development for 30, 35 years actually already. And it's been developed by marine ecosystem modelers and scientists. So we thought, well, why reinvent the wheel if we can sort of somehow interact with this software with MSP Challenge, then we can offer an actual ecosystem impact simulation in the game based on what people actually draw, a very responsive system. Awesome, let's do that. And the way it works is depicted on this slide. So you've got the activities that you're planning. Could be a wind farm, but it could also be something else like new oil and gas installations or shipping routes. Those activities generate pressures on the ecosystem. Think of a pressure as such as noise, right? Noise that we generate with our human activities is a pressure on the ecosystem. And then those pressures are fed into the Ecopath with EcoSim model. And included in that model are how all the different species respond to all these pressures. So it's included in the model that, for instance, herring is a particular species that really can't handle noise very well, especially on certain frequencies, but we've simplified it for now in our system to call it generically noise. So the ecosystem simulation takes it into account. If there's an area that has a high density of herring and a high density of noise, then surely in that area, the herring population will go down. The density of herring will go down. And that might have further repercussions, right? Because herring eats other species and is eaten by other species. So if herring goes down, then the prey might go up and the predators might go down as well. So that's a further impact that you could all see with this beautiful ecosystem simulation. And as a player would start digging through all these layers and all the information contained in MSP Challenge, they would actually find out that when you build a wind farm, you're disallowing commercial fishing in that wind farm. And that is a huge factor for the state of the stock of species, as it's called in ecosystem modeling. So that's the main reason why actually a lot of species densities go up in wind farm areas, simply because there's no more fishing there anymore, commercial fishing. So yeah, did we get at this level just like that? No, it took us many years, and actually, arguably, it took us a decade, because MSP Challenge started already 10 years ago. In 2011, two gentlemen of the Dutch government approached Igor Meijer, the professor under which I'm still working to this very day. He was then still at Delft University of Technology. And they approached them, these two gentlemen, they approached Igor with this idea of creating a first, let's say, quick and dirty simulation game that could be played at a big event in Lisbon later that year. I think it was within 3 months already, so they were quite late. They had all but 3 months to design and develop a prototype of a game that could be played at this event, where dozens of EU government employees would come together to talk about this new phenomenon that's called MSP. And rather than just talking about that, the idea was to have a simulation game so that people could actually experience it. It was quite a success. People were very happy that this was just done and offered at the event, even though it was a simple game, obviously, with 3 months of design and development time. But because of that success, further steps could be taken. And every next step also had quite enough success to keep continuing. So actually by now, the current version of the game that you just saw, we call it version 4 of MSP Challenge, which started development late 2015, more like early 2016, actually. So between 2011 and the current version, the people that were involved, it wasn't all Breda University of Applied Sciences employees, started over 3 times. And actually also some people involved in the entire MSP Challenge phenomenon also created board games at some point as a separate parallel activity. So yeah, the larger community of MSP Challenge designers, developers, and appliers that does not only limit itself to Breda University of Applied Sciences, have been working on this already for 10 years. And yeah, that alone makes me still wonder how could that have been? It's quite unique. The current version of the game is heavily funded by the European Union, as this slide shows, with no less than 5 European Union flags on it, all different funding programs graciously offering us some funding to keep going year after year after year. We also acknowledge the Scottish government, the Dutch government, for offering some funding to keep us going. So yeah, the current version 4 of MSP Challenge, the simulation platform, is really the result of many years of funding from government agencies all over the place, mostly within the EU. So this is the halfway point of my keynote. How am I doing? Okay, I'm doing okay. So it's I hope you're still there and awake and interested. At least I try to paint a picture of what MSP is and what MSP Challenge is, so that I can now dig further into what would we like to see happening with this? What would be the ideal impact, and how have we been trying to reach that over the last years? So let's go to the second half then, about the ideal impact of MSP Challenge to start with. Well, to explain this, I'll first show this slide explaining some of those projects that I mentioned just before with all those logos, some of the projects and their timing. So as I mentioned, we started developing the current version of MSP Challenge, the simulation platform, about 5 years ago, early 2016, thanks to funding of Interreg North Sea region, Interreg Baltic Sea region with Baltic lines, and SimCelt. So I'm skipping SB, MSP for a moment, SimCelt as well, also a European Union project. Those were 3 big projects that started almost around the same time, that together offered really proper funding to really start from scratch again and develop a flexible platform that we have now that could work with data concerning all sorts of sea basins. In particular, the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, and the Clyde Marine region, which is a small sea area in the northwest of Scotland, off of Glasgow. So that's where it all started. And as you can see from this slide, we were, well, lucky enough, but also, working hard to just get more projects in to keep developing this platform and applying it left and right, also for other sea basins, and keep extending and improving on it. Why do I mention this before explaining the ideal impact that we want with MSP Challenge? Well, I explain it because actually, thanks to these projects, our vision of the ideal impact could evolve over time. So if you were to ask me 5 years ago what the ideal impact was, I would have told you that we wanted people to play MSP Challenge to understand the intricacies and complexity of MSP, right? Nothing more, nothing less either, but that's what we wanted. We wanted just people to play the game for a day, maybe, and come out understanding all the nitty-gritty and the overall complexity of MSP. Fine, happy, let's go. 5 years ago, huh? And then in these projects, for instance, around the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, we were challenged by our partners to take it a step further, because they actually saw more potential. If we frame our impact in this, along this line, it sounds rather cognitive, right? Understanding. It sounds rather awareness raising kind of an objective, the intricacies and complexity. Oh yeah, okay, I understand that. I'm aware of that now. And that's it, right? Can't we do more? If you're creating this platform, that's the feedback we were getting. If you're creating this platform to be so flexible and to use real data and best available simulations as well by ecosystem modelers that have been working on those models for decades, can't we do much more? Well, quite rightly, I guess, and we could always try, of course. So by now, what we're actually, presenting and coming out with is MSP Challenge as heading towards becoming a new next generation support system for MSP itself. Which is still, just reading this and thinking about this is still daunting and a bit scary to me. But we really would like to see whether we can get there. I do stress the towards here. We're not there yet, but we do want to think of MSP Challenge as a sort of a next generation support system. To be, what does that mean then? Well, as a next generation support system, we would like to see MSP Challenge in time being used by sector stakeholders to explicate and refine their wishes, concerns, ideas, interests, right? It's one thing to get wind farm developers to come to a workshop and say, I want more areas for wind farms. Another thing is letting them work with MSP Challenge to show where they think they could develop a wind farm, and probably then by doing that, realizing that they might need to refine those wishes and ideas, and they could already refine then their interests as they voice them to the government. It could also be used by marine scientists to make their newly developed knowledge practicable. So you have to imagine and realize that when it comes to the marine environment, there's a lot we don't know as a human race. There's really a lot we don't know. I think some people say, as a sort of a nice, framing, to make people realize just how little we know. We seem to know as a human race more about what's going on in space, or at least in our solar system, than what's going on in the deep waters of our oceans. It's really a lot of knowledge that needs to be developed there, especially if you want to plan the use of space further, develop it further over the next decades or so. Then surely a lot of questions need to be asked and answered to make sure that we're doing the right things and we're not ruining the marine ecosystem. So marine scientists, with the surge of MSP, marine scientists have gotten a lot more work, not always a lot more funding though, but they've gotten a lot more work to offer knowledge and insights, information to government professionals on certain impacts, possible impacts of wind farms or certain wind farm technology choices on the marine ecosystem. And often, what they also then need is a platform to make that knowledge practicable, and MSP Challenge could do that, as I think you can imagine. But of course, we would like to see MSP Challenge also used by an MSP team within the national government itself to just develop and evaluate the drafts of spatial plans. And of course, all of that doesn't negate our original interest that we would love to see MSP Challenge continue to be used by interested people, students and professionals. I stress students here as well, of course, to still understand the intricacies and overall complexity of MSP and approach the process then accordingly. Yeah. So by now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, Harald, this is ludicrous. This is overambitious. This is impossible. And this is also not clear enough. What do you mean in time? How much time are you allowing yourself for this? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime? How are you going to measure this? How are you going to be sure that this is actually happening? And how can you prove it? Valid questions, valid remarks. I concede that immediately. But I think you're getting already an idea from my previous slides that it's also a matter of MSP Challenge evolving over the years as a program of projects where that we've been given so much trust by different organizations and funders. We have to try to do this. We have no other choice anymore. So let's start thinking about how we could achieve this and how we've been trying to achieve this so far. And that's actually close to wrapping up then my talk. So let's talk about these impact efforts we've been doing so far. I'm going back to that project diagram and I'm adding a couple lines to it. So you can see a line there around 2018, very first session, it says. And you can see a line there, of course, around early 2020 when the corona pandemic hit. So with this slide, I am going to talk to you. I'm going to start talking to you about the game sessions we started doing. Now, so the projects from the very first project for this latest version of MSP Challenge, North Sea, Baltic Lines, all those projects, we were tasked with not just designing and developing the software, the game, the platform, but also applying it, and quite rightly so, because if someone were to fund a project that's purely a research project, serious games or gamification research project funded by the EU, if someone were to fund a project that's purely about development and not at all about application, then that would be highly risky. Let's put it like that, right? As a funder, you would find that risky. So we were, of course, just from the very beginning, from the get-go, tasked with applying it in the form of game sessions. And we started doing that in January 2018. So that's where our first attempts at getting some impact started. Here's some photographs of the many sessions we've done since then, actually. It's been more than 40 sessions since January 2018. And this was all pre-COVID. So relish these photographs, people. this was still possible back then, of course. We did these sessions with actual planners, maritime spatial planners, their stakeholders, sector stakeholders, as you now know, the typical ones, but also with lots of teachers and students at universities. And we did a lot of them. Typically, as you can see from these photos, they involved 10, 20, maybe 30 at most people. So we would go around European Union with a bunch of laptops and set up a session with, for instance, the North Sea or the Baltic Sea, and spend a day, maybe 2 days even, a full day or maybe 2 full days with this group of people to make maritime spatial plans for that sea basin. So the people, the participants would be grouped into country teams, so 4 or 5 people per country around that sea basin, the Netherlands, Germany, etc., and then be tasked to develop maritime spatial plans. And good luck, see how far you get, see what happens. And then typically we would do 1 or 2 rounds if we had time, ideally 2 rounds of simulations, so that people can actually experience come full circle, basically, of planning, simulating, evaluating, and planning again, to keep learning about everything. Of course, since the corona pandemic hits, obviously everything went online. So we were gutted initially by that, because we really enjoyed the combined face-to-face and digital experience that we were getting by going somewhere and spending 1 or 2 full days with a group of people. You can imagine, as you saw in those photos, just a lovely bustling activity in the room and also directed to the screen. A lovely combination of digital interactions and face-to-face interactions. We were gutted that Corona, of course, hit, like everyone. I don't need to explain that, but also because of where we were going with all those game sessions. But we were also lucky, of course. This is a multiplayer online game, so we could move online and continue. And we got to experience more and more over, let's be honest, it's already been almost 2 years. We got to experience more and more that with every session we would have a different group of people doing different kinds of things with very diverse impacts. Some people would try to protect everything and see how the ecosystem model would respond if we just stop fishing or disallow fishing in large areas of the North Sea. Would the ecosystem model actually handle that well, or would we let certain species grow so much and so quickly that the whole ecosystem would become disbalanced, and basically it would take decades to recover to a sort of new equilibrium. And other groups decided to just keep developing wind farms all over the place to try to reach insane stretch targets for offshore renewable energy development, and thereby also seeing all the noise that would be generated, all other kinds of pressures that would be generated, but also the limits on fishing that would be a result of that. So diverse plans, diverse impacts with all these groups. And when I made this slide, I couldn't really realize it. I was quite surprised, actually, but it's amazing to see that we've worked with all those sessions. We've worked with 29 different partner institutions, if I put them all in a list. And the top ones that you're seeing under these bullets are the partners that have come back more than once. So you're seeing there 4 different universities, and then you're seeing the International Ocean Institute in South Africa, which is a post-academic training organization. So there we work with professionals who are trained in ocean governance in Africa. They come back for more. That's wonderful. And then you're seeing, as the last 3 bullets, 3 governmental institutes. Again, as I mentioned before, the Scottish government, Dutch government, but also the German government agency, BSH, coming back to ask us to help them apply MSP Challenge as they make draft plans, as they work with stakeholders. So we're starting to get there, which is quite amazing. If I were to put actually all the game sessions that we've been doing and the number of participants involved in a chart, this is what it looks like. So here we see quarter by quarter the different sessions and the total number of participants in that quarter for all the sessions that we did. It's nice to pinpoint some peaks, of course, and to explain what happened there. So we see a nice peak here in the fourth quarter of 2018. That's when, well, you have to realize when we did our first session in January 2018, it certainly went well enough, but we did more as 2018 progressed. And all of a sudden, towards the end of 2018, we saw a first peak of interest in sessions, basically results of those first successful game sessions and the word of mouth that started there. So that was an interesting peak. All of a sudden, towards the end of the year, everyone wanted something in terms of a game session. And what's also, of course, interesting to note here is this second peak. It's almost like the Corona numbers, isn't it? A wave. Oh no, we don't want waves. Anyway, but you do also notice this this lack of anything in the second quarter of 2020. Yes, indeed, this is all related to the Corona pandemic, of course. So when the pandemic hit, for a while, at least a quarter, I'd say, two quarters, maybe 3 quarters, we were struggling to figure out what to do, like everyone else, right? And then towards the second half of 2020, as people got more comfortable with doing things online, they realized, well, if Breda can help us host an online MSP Challenge session, then yeah, that would be awesome, right? Because yeah, I think we're all getting more and more fed up with you know, rather passive online experiences like this one. Apologies, but yeah. So if some partner, Breda University of Applied Sciences, can offer a more active, interactive, proactive, what have you, online experience by MSP Challenge, that's great. So that's where we see this huge peak at the beginning of this year. Many more people approaching us saying, well, we hear you can do online game sessions, educational ones mostly. So that's mostly universities coming there. We also started releasing the software publicly, of course, around the time that the pandemic hit. We had really no choice there. We didn't really feel we were ready for it. And to be honest, I still feel like we're not really ready for it because the software is not very stable yet. I mean, it's stable enough. And it's user-friendly enough, and it's comprehensive enough, surely. But I'm maybe overcritical kind of person. It's I know the faults. I know where we still need to do a lot of work. But we really didn't have a choice. If we're going to go full online because of the Corona pandemic, then we just needed to release the software publicly. And actually, regardless of that, of course, we always wanted to release the software at some point publicly anyway, right? It's not our intention to keep a hold of this software and make sure that we do all these game sessions, nobody else. No, of course not. We wanted to release the software. And especially around the end of 2018, we realized that we wanted to go open source. So this wasn't a decision that we already made 5 years ago, not at all. 5 years ago, we didn't know there would be a need to to identify a license to begin with. We were mostly focused on creating a game that people could play to understand the complexity and intricacies of MSP. Releasing it and seeing what happens. We'll get there at some point. We'll get there. And everything is possible, but it depends on whether we do a good job, if there's an interest in it, right? So let's make sure that we do a good job first and develop something that's useful before we think about releasing and models for that. So towards the end of 2018, we realized we need to think about this really now and make a decision. And we made a conscious decision to go open source and free with the software. And the Corona pandemic also really contributed to speeding up the release process itself. So at the beginning of 2020, roughly around the same time as the pandemic hit, I sort of did this and pushed the button to release a first version, which we called Beta 3, the third beta version of MSP Challenge. And as you can see, we've been releasing updates, beta updates ever since, roughly 3 or 4 times a year. We're now on beta 9, so we're still not out of beta. I really don't feel like we can confidently say that we can be out of beta, so that's why it's still called a beta version. And as we released it, we of course needed to build in some mechanics, some stuff in our entire release system and pipeline to make sure that we knew what was going on, right? As soon as you release it, people could, in theory, of course, with enough marketing and communication, just pick it up, do something with it, and we wouldn't know about it. And of course, we're a university, we still have a research interest. So we decided to obligate user registrations for people to be able to download the software to begin with. And here's a graph of how user registrations developed over the past 2 years. We're now up to 400 registered users, which might not seem like a lot. But on the other hand, with a product like this that serves a rather niche market, I would say, doesn't have to, but it does. That's our choice. 400 registered users is quite nice over a 2-year period. It's interesting again to emphasize some of the peaks you're seeing here to figure out what's the story there. So there's a little peak here around May 2020, and there's a bigger peak here towards the end of summer of 2020. Those were moments when I did a webinar that turned out to be very well viewed and attended webinars. I think the one at the end of the summer of 2020 had 300 attendance from mostly North America, the US and Canada, I believe. And they all went to the website and registered. And well, there you go. And although user registrations is interesting, it doesn't say a lot either. I realize that, so I have some more digging in to do in the databases to see what we can get out of it. We don't log a lot. We log user registrations, we log downloads, a number of downloads of the software, and we log if people use the full platform to create their own server, we log whether they create a server session like a North Sea that people should be able to log on to, or a Baltic Sea. If people create those sessions, those server sessions, then we log that too. So I have some digging to do, but I actually know that not a lot of these 400, maybe a handful of people have installed the full platform. Most of these people have registered to log on once to download the client software, so the end user software of which you saw videos, to start playing around on our demo server and leave it at that, or to join a session that I'm actually also facilitating. So reflecting on all of that, what we actually have in place now is sort of an organization that involves 2 parallel processes. One being on the sessions that we're doing, leading to the identification of bugs and graphical user interface elements that could be tweaked, bugs that could be fixed, that we can then do, test, and incorporate into a next release, and then use in a next session, a next game session or workshop. The other process being these bigger projects that involve collaborations with the project consortium, leading to bigger ideas, new redesigns or new designs of features and the whole system. So much lengthier and grander process there, leading us to work on their implementation and then moving it over to the left side to test it and include it in the next release. And I think this model is really working for us at the moment, even though it's a very challenging model to manage for me and others involved. It is working very well to keep this continuous sort of co-design and co-development going. Okay, last 2 slides. What's next? Well, we really want to further enable people to use everything on their own without our help. We have some work to do there. People to use everything sounds grand, because it is grand. There's multiple things. If I were to sort of dissect this, deconstruct this sentence, I could talk about making it easier for the end user to use the features in the software of which you saw the videos, but also making it easier for people to install the entire platform and set up their own servers, etc. We need to keep improving and extending on the user interface of the end user to improve on usability. So that's definitely related there. We need to offer better technical support for integrating other existing simulations. Well, we want to do that. We know that there's all sorts of scientific communities out there that offer simulations and models that somehow, a little bit or completely, can be connected conceptually and technologically to MSP challenges, and we want to facilitate that. And we want to offer better technical support for adding new sea basins, new additions. So what if you want to have to work around, I don't know, the Indian Ocean or the Pacific? What do you, some regions that we haven't even thought about yet? What if you wanted to play MSP Challenge around that sea basin? Can't we offer that more quickly and easily? Can't we do that? Can't we automate that? And of course, at some point, we want to get out of beta, make sure that we can confidently call it a full release. Now, all of this, and that's my last slide, all of this relates to a concept that has come up recently. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the concept of the digital twin. Because I think actually, although I am fearing how the term is being used and how it's gaining momentum, I'm fearing a repetition of history here, especially reflecting on how gamification as a term came up and was used and abused all over the place to make people invest in it for right and wrong reasons, or even serious games as a term before that. It went through the same kind of development, I would say. I'm fearing that the term digital twin is doing the same. But the idea, of course, is that with all the data that we can gather nowadays, sometimes automatically, but not always, through sensors, we can create digital representations of an aspect of physical reality that people can actually monitor, use in monitoring, but also use in planning, use in creating new ideas and exploring what the impact could be. That is, of course, a very attractive idea. It relates to the holodeck and to other ideas that are actually decades old. This idea of capturing reality in a digital realm so that you can manipulate it, use it as a safe environment to test things, to learn things, to train things, is still an attractive idea. And actually everything I just explained as our intermediate goals relate to that. So I wanted to mention this Iliad project that we recently got. It was created, it was awarded not so long ago. I briefly mentioned it on one of my slides before. It's starting in February, and it is about developing a digital twin of the ocean, and we're involved in that. So everything I just mentioned is related to that, and will be picked up within this project at least. So there you have it, my whole story of the MSP Challenge Simulation Platform heading towards a next generation support system. And I'll leave you with a quick mentioning of our website where you can just download it, try it out, get some tutorial videos if you like, read some papers, and get more information if you want on mspchallenge.info. And with that, I say thank you, and would like to see if there's any questions.